Right, hello guys, welcome back. Today we are talking about Midnight Coup. We're going to be going through a few roles today, starting with Firefly Frenzy, and then a couple others, one with Explosive Payload Kinetic Tremors, another with Explosive Payload Desperate Measures, and we're also going to be comparing it to the Explosive Payload Frenzy Fatebringer that I have, because I don't actually have a role of that on Midnight Coup, but they behave the exact same way, so we're going to be seeing how that sort of shakes up versus the roles you can get on Midnight Coup these days. So at first I thought I would just take us through this at-light lost sector just so we can see how things are going, so, you know, just to get a feel for the weapon. This is the first time that I'm using this role, so, you know, feels pretty fantastic. At the end, I also want to show you guys a role on Carl specifically, just to show you an interaction that was kind of hyped up when its perk pool was originally shown to us. So I'll just finish killing all these enemies. Feels pretty good so far. This is the role I have with Frenzy and Firefly, which honestly is probably my favorite role, and I'll explain why as we get later into the video, but it's a pretty solid role, and it just feels really nice to use. A thing with primary weapons that I look out for, really, if I am using one, I want it to feel nice to use, and, you know, Midnight Coup fits that bill perfectly. So now that we're at Carl, I'm going to switch to my other role, and this is the Explosive Payload Kinetic Tremors role. So basically, this role was hyped a lot when people saw the perk pool, because they thought that Explosive Payload would be able to proc Kinetic Tremors in less than 6 shots, because on previous hand cannon iterations, having Kinetic Tremors on those hand cannons, you would need to hit 6 shots in order to proc the perk, and people thought that Explosive Payload would reduce this in half because of the 2 damage instances provided by it. However, some of you may have seen Hinra's video on this, but unfortunately that interaction is not the way we thought it would work, so it still unfortunately takes 6 shots. So if you see here, I can do 1, 2, 3, and it doesn't proc Kinetic Tremors, which is quite unfortunate, but, you know, it is what it is. So if I do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, there's the Kinetic Tremors proc. And at that point, with 6 shots, you're using a hand cannon to clear base red bar adds, right? And at that point, after 6 shots, they'll be dead. You won't be able to proc Kinetic Tremors at all, really. You'll only be able to proc it on beefier targets like Carl, so if I do it again, it just... At that point, why are you using a hand cannon? You should be using a special weapon. As you can see here, look, kill him in 1 shot. You might be able to proc it off these guys. Again, you wouldn't really be using a hand cannon for that, so yeah. I think you can give Kinetic Tremors a pass. Also, another thing I want to mention is that this new version of Midnight Coup does have quite noticeable recoil. As you can see, it does have 80 recoil direction, and it kind of tends to the right. So I would actually recommend putting on a counterbalance stock for your mod of choice. Of course, you can use minor spec if you don't mind the recoil. But again, I really like hand cannons feeling nice to use. So if you see here, without me correcting for recoil at all, it noticeably kicks up and to the right. But if I put on a counterbalance mod, you can see that it improves it massively. So just for like the feel of the weapon, I would recommend having that counterbalance mod on. And also, let's not forget about the origin trait, which gives you grenade energy whenever you're getting kills. I think it's like 5% of your grenade energy whenever you're getting kills, as long as you're on a light subclass. If you're on a dark subclass, it gives you melee energy. Also, just another side note, Callus is selected, looks fantastic on it. This is the original color, of course. It does look slightly different with the sort of into the light stripes, but still looking absolutely fantastic with Callus is selected. Okay, so let's take it into some harder content. Now we're back in the legendary Witch Queen mission that I've used for some of my previous videos, so let's just give it a spin, see how it goes. This is the Firefly Frenzy role that we're testing first, so let's just have a go. Still performing pretty nice. Should be getting the Frenzy proc coming up relatively soon. There it is, there's the Frenzy, so we're going to have that the whole time now, which is quite nice. Trying to get some Firefly procs here. Honestly, it's pretty nice. It feels better than the Recluse did when I did the same mission with the Recluse, I will say. I think that is obviously because it's a kinetic, it's doing more damage. But even against this difficulty, it still feels pretty solid. But even from range, you know, it feels nice. Just the sound and feel that you get from Frenzy. And, you know, I love the Midnight Coup model, so it just feels really nice to use. Right, so obviously Midnight Coup's main competition is going to be Fatebringer, because Fatebringer is the same archetype, and it also gets Explosive Payload in the left column, which is quite rare for primaries in these days. I think only like 4 primaries even get this, and it also gets Frenzy in the right column. So just for this run, I'm going to show you what Explosive Payload and Frenzy looks like on Fatebringer, because obviously it's going to be the exact same on a Midnight Coup if you had that role, because they're basically the same weapon. So let's just do a quick run through of this.
Looks like we're interrupting something. Where's the wizard
just feels very solid. Fatebringer is basically all reliable, you know, it won't let you down. There's the Frenzy proc. So now we can kind of just go to town. Feeling very nice. It one-shots the Acolytes to the head, which is quite lovely. Love to see that. So yeah, yet another consistent pick. If you end up getting this roll on your Midnight Coup, do keep it, because just like Firefly Frenzy, it still feels just as consistent. And bear in mind that Explosive Payload is an innate damage buff as well. I believe it's around a 10% damage buff to your base damage. So, you know, you've basically got double damage perks. You have one damage perk in the left and another in the right, which also gives you reload and handling. So, you know, what more could you ask for? Next up, we have the Explosive Payload Desperate Measures roll, which is kind of similar to the Explosive Payload Frenzy roll. It's just the damage buff is a little bit higher. Obviously, you don't get the reload and handling bonuses that Frenzy gives you, but you do get a higher percentage damage buff if you manage to get it rolling. So let's just show you what that looks like quickly. And for those who don't know, Desperate Measures works on like a kills and ability basis. So any kill I get will give me 10% damage. It's kind of like Master of Arms in that way, where any kill will immediately proc that 10% damage. And then I just need to get some ability kills. So I'll just pop that grenade down there to get the maximum stack of the buff. So we've got ×2, ×3 there in the bottom left, you can see. And again, this does feel pretty solid. We got the 10% damage buff from Explosive Payload, and combining that with the 30%, which we are refreshing from Desperate Measures, does make it feel like a very strong primary. Even against this Ogre, pretty solid, pretty solid. I'm actually a little bit impressed, to be honest. I wasn't so sure about Desperate Measures, but you know, on Recluse, it wasn't exactly the greatest pick, but on this, yeah, I can get behind this. I can get behind this, definitely. Pretty solid. Okay, so obviously those were only 3 rolls that I showed you, and the reason why that is because there are actually quite a few perks on this weapon that you can avoid. I'll just throw up a screenshot of the D2 Foundry, but basically shoot to loot, you can kind of avoid that despite it actually being a very good utility perk. Unfortunately, because it has shoot to loot in the same column as Explosive Payload, you can't combine them together, because when they are combined, they do make for a very nice utility weapon, like something on the Vulpecula here, which you can see that I just bought from Banshee. This has shoot to loot Explosive Payload in separate columns, which makes it quite nice for utility in some situations. Now, you won't be using this roll all the time, but it's just, you know, one of those utility weapons that you'll keep in your vault and pull out for something you need whenever you want to. But yeah, because they're in the same column on Fatebringer, it's kind of unfortunate. So then we also have Moving Target. This is a PvP pick, so you can kind of instantly rule this out. Enlightened Action is actually a wasted perk with the amount of good damage and reload perks there are, because basically it shares the same column as Firefly, which gives you that innate reload speed, and you also have Frenzy as a damage perk option, which gives you +100 reload. So there are lots of perks which kind of negate the need for Enlightened Action on this weapon, so I would avoid keeping any copies you have with it on. Similar situation with Outlaw. Firefly is literally Outlaw, but with extra AoE. Same with Frenzy. You know, you guys know the story. Kind of a useless perk. Rampage. Unfortunately, the classic combo of Outlaw Rampage isn't the greatest on this weapon, because Rampage is a bit of a mid-tier perk. You know, the damage buff only lasts around 4 seconds compared to Frenzy, which is kind of active all the time as long as you're taking or dealing damage. And even Desperate Measures is better than Rampage, because you can get stacks via ability and weapon kills. Zen Moment is also a PvP roll, we can rule that out. And then One For All, I don't actually have a roll with One For All that I tested here today, but it is also a decent option. It's a 10-second 35% damage buff, but me personally, I would prefer something like Frenzy because of the added feel that the gun gets. Again, like I said earlier, I prefer that a primary weapon feels nice to use, so the added handling and reload is very nice. You don't get any of that with One For All, and if you wanted to be optimal with One For All, you'd pair it with Explosive Payload, because then the splash damage from Explosive Payload can proc One For All more consistently and faster, and with that you don't get any bonuses to your stats, which is something that I don't personally like, but if that's for you, then that's totally fine. And then finally, Opening Shot is also a PvP perk, so you can pass on this one. Okay, so I'm just going to throw up some strike gameplay of me using it in the background, and we're just going to briefly talk about my thoughts on this weapon. So overall, I do think it's quite a nice hand cannon. I really liked Midnight Coup back in the day, and obviously I'm glad that it's back, and it does have some pretty nice rolls as far as hand cannons go in PvE. It probably is the best PvE hand cannon there is in the game right now, especially because of the combinations of Explosive Payload Frenzy and Firefly Frenzy, which Fatebringer didn't get, by the way. In terms of what role I would actually recommend chasing, I think me personally, I would have to recommend Firefly Frenzy over Explosive Payload Frenzy. Explosive Payload does give you a little bit more damage, but I do prefer the added AoE damage that you get from Firefly, plus the added reload speed from Firefly is nice before you get Frenzy proc, just to kind of keep things consistent and feeling nice up until you get that Frenzy proc. Desperate Measures is also a pretty interesting perk on this weapon, because in the current meta, abilities do dominate quite a lot, and you know, you'll be getting kills with abilities quite often, and just to get the maximum 30% damage buff, you only need 1 kill from the weapon itself, provided you're getting at least 2 kills from your other abilities. It's kind of like a personal preference thing. If you like Desperate Measures, go for it. If you don't, and you want to sacrifice a little bit of damage buff for something like Frenzy, then you know, that's totally up to you. Also, at the end of the day, do bear in mind that it is just a hand cannon. A lot of people will be scared to admit this, but we are not really in a legendary primary meta right now. You can use legendary primaries like Midnight Coup and Zhao Bane. However, I believe we are very much in an exotic primary or double special meta, because exotic primaries excel at creating heavy ammo for your teammates as long as you have, you know, scouts and finders on your helmet. And with things like Aeons and Cenotaph existing, it's never been easier to make heavy ammo for your team, which promotes the heavy and double special playstyle even more. That isn't to say you should not use Midnight Coup, because in its own right, it is a very fun gun, but if we're talking sort of wider endgame meta, I wouldn't personally see myself using this gun outside of, you know, just having fun doing strikes or that sort of thing. Me personally, I would much rather use a loadout that has double special in it, something like Forbearance, and more often than not, I'm using a special weapon in my kinetic slot when I'm just playing the game. You know, something like an Aegis Scepter or a Conditional Finality or even Arbalist or something like that, you know, Izanagi's Burden if I'm doing damage. Personally, I much rather prefer having primary weapons in the energy slot if I have to use them. This is why I'm a big fan of something like Zhao Bane, but you know, obviously it is still a very, very solid weapon, and I am quite happy that it's back because it is a very nice feeling hand cannon, and it does have a lot of very good competitive perks to support it. But yeah, that's basically my thoughts on Midnight Coup. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, and yeah, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one. If you made it this far, thank you so much. Your support means the world. And if you're really into the content I create, consider becoming a member of the channel, which not only lets you support me in the best way possible, it also nets you a whole host of awesome perks along with it. A massive shout out to these members up on screen, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now, dear viewer.